There he is.
Thank
Hey,
you.
guys.
Thank you for being so.
For God's sakes, we've been waiting forever, Steve.
He goes, I'm going to text him when you're ready. We're ready. Would we do this to you twice in one day? No.
You know, I flew to L.A. in the meantime. I was there. I spent some lunch. I came back, had my hair done.
There you go. Your hair looks very. You've changed your look since we saw you last.
You know, I change my look every time I wake up. So.
Really? No, really. Really? No, really.
Steve is here. Steve Blank is here. Now, we're going to be talking about computer chips, which is apparently in everything. I don't believe that. I don't think there's anything in my house that has a chip. But supposedly, it's a crisis because everything runs on a chip, and we're running out of chips. And I don't really, how is that possible? Who got blindsided? They didn't see, the stack is going down. How could we get to a place where we're running out of chips, we don't have chips, and everything needs a chip? So really? Really.
So to that point, I know when I'm running low on toilet paper. I know when I'm running low on eggs. In this world, Steve, with AI, with the technology we have, when I heard that, we're running out of chips, it's a chip shortage, I always, because I was on radio for so many years, and I always wanted to go deep, I go, wait a minute. I think that this chip shortage and the supply chain thing was a problem before COVID, before all of a sudden it reared its little head. And I'm wondering if there's stuff we're not hearing about, because you got this China, Taiwan, United States game that's being played about who has what and who's making what. And it's, will they go to war or won't they? Which is like, it's binary. There's nothing in between war or no war. So Steve is a...
What is the question? Get to the question.
The question
First of all, you're saying Steve. You haven't introduced the man.
I'm doing it now.
Nobody knows.
If you
we're out of context.
If you could stop, I'm doing it.
You don't want to give a credential? You don't want to say who we're talking to, who a person is?
As soon as you stop
and then how about a question that doesn't go on for a minute
Here we go. So Steve is a titan of the tech industry. He showed up there in Silicon Valley just as it was starting to boom, invested in, I think, 8 companies. He had a couple huge hits and a couple not so big hits, but he's also an educator. He teaches at Columbia, he teaches at other universities. He also is...
What does he teach?
He teaches a lot of different stuff, but one of them is how to scale businesses, right. And the fact that not every innovator knows how to run a business. Did I do that right, Steve, kind of?
Well, close enough.
Close enough.
All right, so
for all your
what we want to know about is the really...
Ask your
oh my God, he
question,
won't stop.
A shortened version.
It's like being with my
question.
mother. It's like, I know.
Concise. 15 words. 15 words. That's a question.
So really, no, really. The chip, is there A, really a chip shortage? And B, is there something we don't know about this? Because really, no, really hard to believe we ran out of chips.
So that's a great question. If I understood the question.
I know it's difficult.
No,
it's difficult, Steve.
You don't suck up to him.
Yeah. No, there's no sucking up. He's an educated man. He couldn't understand what the hell you said.
Let him answer.
It was a perfect question for 2022 because in 2023 we now have a chip glut rather than a chip shortage.
No.
And it's really interesting is you mentioned all the right words is the chip shortage, China, competition, offshoring, onshoring, chips and everything, chips and nothing. It turns out that chips are kind of the new oil of the 21st century, where we went to war for oil in the Middle East. The concern is we might actually go to war over chips in the 21st century because they're not made in the U.S. and they're made in a country called Taiwan, at least most of the advanced chips that you use in your iPhones or in other devices. And if you remember, Taiwan, while they think of themselves as independent,
right.
China believes that they're just a breakaway province. And that's a real problem for the U.S., is that we're now completely dependent on at least the most advanced chips being made in factories called foundries, most of them in a foundry run by a company called TSMC, which is a Taiwanese company. And that's, 90 miles from the shores of People's Republic of China. And so that's why last year the U.S. government did, for the first time in like 75 years, stood up a national industrial policy, which just basically said we're going to put our thumb on the scale and give $50+ billion to U.S. chip manufacturers to start building factories in the U.S. That's, getting involved in industrial policy was something this country just never did for a long time.
Right.
And now we're actually doing that. But what was your question?
But Steve, just picking up on something you just said, yes, I know, I've read that we are now making significant investments in U.S.-based chip production. But those factories, am I wrong? They take like a decade to build one of these places, doesn't it?
Yeah, 2 to 4 years. So the TSMC are now building a couple in Arizona, and they'll come up to speed maybe late this year, next year. But it's not just how long do they take. It's still, even when they are functioning, there may be 2% of TSMC's output in Taiwan.
Right. And different kinds of chips. They're not. What my understanding too is that in Taiwan they're making this an A-grade chip, and they ain't going to share that technology. They'll make other chips down here, but they're not stupid. They want to keep their chip as the gold standard, so to speak. Correct?
So it's kind of interesting. It's not that hard to explain, but it requires a little explanation. There are kind of three types of chips. Ones that think, called logic chips, and those are the brains of most devices, and those are made by companies like Intel that make microprocessors. But also what this company in Taiwan does is they don't design any of the chips. They actually make them for other people. So IBM and AMD and Qualcomm and NVIDIA, names that might not be familiar but are familiar to the technology crowd, they design the chips, but this company in Taiwan makes them on the most advanced technology that exists on the planet. While Intel designs it and makes them themselves. Those are logic chips.
Okay.
The other types of chips that are used in iPhones or anything else you might have are memory chips, chips that store information. And those are kind of made by American companies like Micron and South Korean companies like Samsung, et cetera. And also, China, People's Republic of China has a big memory company as well. And then there are other chips, and this goes back to the glut conversation versus the shortage, that are analog. That is, instead of ones and zeros, deal with kind of different voltages like power and regulate, temperature and things like that. They're used a lot in automobiles. And one of the bigger companies for that is in Japan. And what's really interesting is that last year, the year before, there were a series of fires in those factories, those what are called fabs, in Japan that made automotive chips. And if you were an automotive company and depending now on chips to control a lot of the functions in your car, when the factory went up in smoke, you looked at your just-in-time inventory and said it's, none-in-time inventory. We don't have chips, and therefore we couldn't make cars. Unless you were Tesla, who managed to figure out how to redesign their cars on the fly to use different chips at a speed that the other automotive companies couldn't do, because Tesla was vertically integrated, meaning they had all the technical people capable of saying, well, if we can't use this chip, we'll use another one. Wow. So GM and Ford and everybody else just stood around with their hand out going, please more, can I have some more? Well, other companies were agile and innovative to redesign around that. So Steve, long answer to your question.
Yeah, Steve, I don't want you to have to say anything or go on the record. So you just do it with blinks. But I think what you're saying, yes or no, a blink will tell me. A guy at Tesla knew a guy who had a match, who went over to a Japanese company. And is that possible? Is that what you're saying? just blink. Just blink. I saw a blink. Did
twice,
you see a blink?
Twice, yeah, by the way, 3 times. A couple of plants.
Actually, what's really interesting is that there were no fires in the Chinese companies.
I saw blinking. I saw a lot of blinking just now.
Wow. So this was my original question was, really, we ran out of chips, with the subtext of, did we really? Is somebody hoarding them? Is somebody sending them, somebody prioritizing? What's the real story underneath we ran out of chips? It can't just be that simple.
And the real story was there were a lot of, quote, accidents in a lot of places that made chips in very specific areas. And then once there's a shortage, what happens in almost every industry, particularly the chip industry, is people double and triple order. That is, you order more than you need. And now we're in this other phase of a glut where everybody's over-ordered, and now we got more chips than we need. Plus, at the same time, we've basically told China they can no longer buy the machines to make their most advanced chips. So we're kind of in a chip trade.
Can I ask you about China? Yeah. It's really funny because everybody goes, let's get tough with China. Let's do this with China. We're not going to let China do this. Tim Cook at Apple's going, yeah, let's get tough with China. Because if I get tough with China,
he's blinking
he's
too?
blinking too.
He's
Because
also
I'm thinking if China screws him over, Apple's Kaputski. I'm sure they're looking at other places to do stuff, but either the prices would go through the roof. So that's got to be a strange relationship between a company like that and China, because he can't turn his back on China tomorrow and say, yeah, we're going to get tough. And yes, President Biden, we're going to do it. How? They're beholden.
Right. And in fact, both Apple and Tesla are both in the same place. Half of Tesla's businesses now from
China.
Their manufacturing facility in Shanghai, which supplies not only China, but a good part of Europe as well. And so there are a number of companies that are beholden to the Chinese market, and more importantly, Chinese suppliers. When the U.S. offshored, that is, took its manufacturing to the lowest cost places to build stuff, which was Southeast Asia and China,
Right.
It not only took those specific industries, but it took the entire ecosystem, which means if you moved automobile manufacturing somewhere, you just didn't move that plant. All the guys who made machine tools and all the companies that made plastics and seats and whatever, pretty easy to understand when you move a manufacturing plant. But the same thing happened starting in the 20th century when we moved chips overseas. Not only did those things go, but all the other machinery and software and whatever now moved with it. Right. Same when you moved your iPhone manufacturing overseas. All the suppliers are now around the places that assemble the iPhone, which happen to be in China. So we ended up hollowing out in a bipartisan way a whole set of industries in the United States to achieve lower cost and higher profits. And in the irony is, of course, the last people we believed who were complaining about this were the unions, who said, you don't understand. You're going to destroy a whole set of industries. Wow. And we went, these inefficient guys, they just want, their jobs, and it's all about Jimmy Hoffa, for those of you who remember that, and they're criminals and whatever. All might have been true, but they were the people who were 100% absolutely right, is that when you offshored Industry X, you're actually hollowing out a whole set of other industries. And I think we saw that the results of that by accident in the 2016 election and some of the polarization of the areas of the country that have been left out.
Right.
And by the way, this offshoring wasn't a Democratic or Republican thing. It was bipartisan. It was everybody who got money from financial industries that thought it was a useful thing to do to optimize profits, and it did. Much cheaper to get cheap stuff in Walmart now because it's made by cheap labor somewhere else. But one could argue whether that was actually great for the American economy or democracy as a whole. But what was your question?
No, it's you've just remembered. No, whether is it going to come back? Was it real, this chip shortage? Now you're saying there's a glut. Are they going to adjust so this won't happen again? Are they going to adjust the just-in-time production? As I understand it, is we used to warehouse stuff, but that's costly. So just-in-time means it's shipped just when you need it to complete the car or the whatever, and you don't have to warehouse it. But you leave yourself vulnerable to weather conditions or fire or whatever. Are we going to change the way we do business here, or are we still going to continue, and this will be a problem in the future yet again?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a problem in the future.
Good.
I think there's... but there are now just new variables, including, how much are we going to import from China versus now we'll move some of that manufacturing and assembly to other places that have low cost of labor, like Vietnam or India, or again, with the CHIPS Act, trying to onshore some of those critical things back to the U.S. It's a pretty, just for that one industry, it's a pretty interesting mess about how globalization has both tied us up and how vulnerable we are to disruptions in the supply chain.
And Steve, isn't there also an element? It's terrible when you only have smatterings of information, which is where I live most of the time. But I thought I remembered something about there's a critical mineral or ore that you must have in order to manufacture chips. Maybe it's something like lithium or something like that, and that we are actually in some jeopardy of running out of this critical element in order to manufacture these chips at all. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think that's usually called money. No, I think the lithium you're talking about is a critical element in making batteries, right, for
Batteries,
electric
right.
cars.
Uh-huh.
And then there's a whole set of what are called rare earth materials, which is a fancy word for materials I can't even pronounce, yttrium and all the other things that are used in high performance batteries that are, magnets that are used in again, electric motors and electric cars. And one of the interesting things about raw materials is Ukraine was a key supplier of something called neon, which was a gas used in making actually in some of the equipment that made the chips, the lithography machine, and that neon needs to be replenished every couple of months in these machines, and we had to find other sources. So the world is kind of interdependent. China kind of owns most of the rare earth materials.
Oh, good for them.
Export control on us, we'd be hard pressed to scramble to make some of those stuff up. But I think your point is a bigger one. The world is kind of interdependent on a whole ton of materials. Russia still supplies most of the titanium in the world used in aircraft and other manufacturing. Cobalt is sourced from places in Africa that are, the same place that blood diamonds come from. So it's kind of a complicated set of supply chains. And the whole idea about some of these industrial acts that the U.S. is thinking about is how do we, in fact, get some of this stuff made and sourced in the U.S. now, or at least among our allies, in a world that's becoming a little less interconnected, and that we're thinking that maybe we need to be self-sufficient in some of these things. We used to have kind of, national kind of supplies of this stuff we would stockpile. We stockpiled oil and we stockpiled strategic materials during the Cold War. And when we thought the world was kind of, unified, we kind of sold most of that stuff off. I think we're going to start stockpiling again.
Thank God. Thank God for stockpiling. That means warehousing. That means trucking. It moves America. I got to ask you, do you have a guy like you? Do you have a vision board?
Do I have a what?
Vision board? Where you put up.
I'm so glad you said a what?
A vision board. Where you put up visions of things that you want to accomplish up on a board. So you can see them every day. I want to do that. I want to do that. I want to do that. No? No vision board?
My vision board extends to make it to the shower in the morning.
All right, so that's too busy doing stuff.
I got it. All right.
So
okay, so doing stuff. You're an entrepreneur. Here's another question. Really. So guys come to investors like you, really smart guys, who want to start businesses. It used to be you had to give fundamentals. Now it seems like they got a vision and a story that they're telling, and you end up with Theranos. Or what's his name? Sam Bankman-Fried. And I don't like people with three names anyway. I'm very suspicious of what are you using three names? How are they pitching in Silicon Valley that could happen? These are smart people. I look at the board of Theranos. It was major people, and nobody went, can we see how this item works before we give you another round of funding? Nobody says that?
Every entrepreneur believes they're a visionary, and there's enough data to say that about 95% of them or more are hallucinating. And so the difference is, to be able to figure out which ones are which. But the problem is, and what you just described, is that in a bubble economy, that is when you can make money on any idea, the ideas and it's whether it could be profitable starts becoming less important. And up till the end of 2022, we were in the greater fool theory of remember musical chairs as a kid?
Right.
Everybody invested, the next guy paid more and more, and the guy sold it off. And so everybody was making profits until someone said, hey, the emperor has no clothes. There is no business here.
How do we get in on that? I love that.
And the venture business, that is the people who invest in startups, make money on those crazy times. And they also make money on the bad times, but then they need different rules. And as you just explained, in the bubble times, the rules are, can we make money from the next dope who's going to put more money in at a bigger valuation?
So it's a pyramid scheme. It's a pyramid scheme.
Yes. And it's more like beer pong.
I'm so glad for clarifying that. Oh,
but
my
in normal times, that is, if you're actually doing this to see who has a company that could be profitable and deliver real products, et cetera, then you look for different things and you invest on different criteria. Meaning you say, hey, can you actually sell stuff that people want to buy? What a great idea. that's not what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. I think we're getting back to that in 2023 and 20.
And the thing that scares me about it, and you read what people are investing in, I want to know the next trend, but I'm noticing that that Jeff Bezos and Musk and all those guys are investing in Neuralinks. A lot of them are thinking about the computer that links directly to your brain. You know, you eliminate the whole deal, it goes right to your brain. And when I see that much investment in that, is that real? Is that something that everybody thinks is going to be happening, or is that a pipe dream?
Well, when I was young and foolish, that was called LSD. It went
We just
right
did
to
a
your
show
We just did a show about that, yeah.
you went right to your brain, and you got to see visions completely. But you know, I think there's a set of amazing stuff that's happening. Neuralink is one of them, and if possible, it's going to provide people ways to communicate. I mean, think about the good part of that, of
Right.
people who are paralyzed and people who
Right.
can't communicate or don't have the motor skills to do that. You know, it also has a dystopian view that says, gee, I'll plug people in whether they want to or not, and whatever. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that turns out. You know, I think that the part when we talk about tech, though, and you talked about Neuralink, the part that really doesn't get talked about much in the same breath is all the stuff that's going on in what's called biotech and life sciences, the people who are using entrepreneurship and innovation to create new drugs, ethical drugs, meaning pharmaceuticals and vaccines and whatever. And you know, when you're talking about iPhones and hardware and chips and whatever, we tend not to look at the other side of technology
Right.
innovation. And in the last couple of years, there's been some breakthroughs that are just amazing to make people healthier and safer in a way that we didn't think was going to be coming for a
But
while.
is there altruism there in Silicon Valley, or are these guys only money? You know, you read all these articles, and it seems like the internet was supposed to be a shared thing, and it was supposed to be democratic, whatever. And now you're seeing, with the fines from the EU to Facebook, that it's all about the money. It's all about engagement and money. Is there altruism still in Silicon Valley?
So you got to remember who you're asking the question to. If you're asking,
A guy in a
No.
giant room, yeah.
no, well, you know, I remind my students you get that at the end of your career, hopefully not at the
Right,
beginning.
right.
But if you're asking the entrepreneurs, that is the people who come up with the idea and the technology and the vision and the whatever, you know, I'd say at least half, if not more of them, maybe 3/4 are doing it because, you know, they see something that they want to create and they want to bring it to reality and they want to make the world better or more, at least more interesting or create something. But remember, the other half of the people you're talking to are extreme capitalists. Those are the venture capitalists. Their goal is to make an obscene return on some of those investments because they're not like a bank wanting 5% interest, knowing that a bank wants almost all their investments to succeed.
Right.
A venture capitalist realizes that most of them will fail. That's a big idea. That's a crazy type of financing that never existed before the last quarter of the 20th century that made all these things that we take for granted possible, because who else would it invest in 10 things knowing that 8 or 9 of them won't work?
That's called
But
a Broadway backer. That's
It's called a
right.
TV show. It's called a TV show in a network.
That was called the producers. They
Yeah,
made a couple
that's exactly right.
right. But this is really interesting. It's a new type of what's called financial asset class that says we're going to take extreme risk for extreme return. And so those are the capitalists. When you see people funding these crazy, you go, why would anybody fund one of those? Well, that's what they would have said about Apple in the 1970s, or they would have said about Bill Gates or whatever. And as I said, most of them fail. But those are different people than the people who start the company. So you need to separate out the entrepreneurs
I got it.
from the venture capitalists who are taking financial risk, with the entrepreneurs who are taking career risk and taking failure risk in a different way. Does that help?
No,
Yeah, it does.
100%.
And so let me ask this, because it kind of segues into this, and I know you're not necessarily an expert in these other new kind
In most of anything.
these cryptocurrencies, but I have never understood, cryptocurrency specifically, and I have friends who have invested in it, and they made a whole bunch of gains, and now they seem to be making a whole bunch of loss. And I know that's the Sam Bankman-Fried thing. Is this a real thing? This alternative sort of tech currency, does that have legs? Do you believe in it, or is it a fesso and something that just doesn't really make much sense.
So I normally don't pass on any question, but this one is way above my pay grade.
Really? Okay.
I mean, I have a bunch of students who start crypto things, and it all gets confused with Bitcoin and blockchain and digital currency and distributed finance, and some of it has some real legs that will, like distributed finance and things built on blockchain that will bypass all the Bitcoin and digital currency stuff. But right now it's all getting confused. And I think 2023 will be the year that it settles out.
So here's the question. Are you invested in crypto?
Never.
Good. Okay. That's
really all I needed to know.
That's how I need to know.
That's how I should have asked the question. Why was I being intellectual and going?
Because you're trying to sound like, we're both, that's what
I'm only here to go,
what
should I be in?
Tell us what we, exactly, we really got you on just to forget the chips. The really is, can we get some investment advice? Because we don't know anybody.
I think the other question at the same time is you should ask is how often do you go to Las Vegas?
Exactly.
And I think there's a direct correlation.
There you go.
So it doesn't mean it was a bad idea. It just means what was your risk tolerance for investing in something.
But you know what? I saw Warren Buffett say, it's a house. You have the house. It's a thing. It's a thing. With crypto, who's it helping? Who's manufacturing? Who's doing anything? That's why he's not in it.
Well, he also talks about, and I think this is Warren Buffett, who said, do you use it? Buy it. You use Crest toothpaste? Buy Tef. You drink Coca-Cola and buy Coca-Cola. He was sort of...
But crypto doesn't provide any. It doesn't. Nobody's hired manufacturing.
Well, you can't hold it in your hand. I don't know what it is. That's why my head spins every time I hear about it.
And they're selling real estate in the megaverse. Okay, so I go, okay, I'm out. I'm out. I don't know anything except I told Jason 20 years from now I'll be my grandfather going, I could have bought that property. In 2014, and now it's $40 million. I'm tempted to think I'm going to miss out, even though it doesn't make any sense to me on a rational level.
So one of the things to think about is for any new tech is that it's usually ahead of regulation and government involvement for years, if not decades. And that's both an opportunity and a problem. Remember we were talking about entrepreneurs and venture capital. Venture capital is an asset class that's completely unregulated, right? There is no regulation.
Right.
Which allows them to do some pretty innovative stuff, but it also allows them to do things like Theranos and FTX and some of the others. Digital currency and crypto is completely unregulated. In fact, some of the contributions FTX was making to both parties was to figure out how to get regulation written to actually legalize that in their favor. Because remember, we operate in a democracy. We operate in what I call a deep pockets democracy. I remind my students that Congress is coin operated, and that's
I'm writing that down. Congress is the best way to put it. Oh boy, wow.
I have, just as an aside, I was a public official for a while in California, and I still remember going to my first meetings and then realizing that the little video I had watched as a kid on how a bill was made, like it didn't have the word lobbyist or government.
They're writing it.
Or something else about like, how did that work? And I'm a little older and more cynical, but obviously democracy is still the best bet we have, but you need to understand how it really works, not how you wish it would work. And then hopefully be able to get it to work a little better and more efficiently. But I found if you really don't understand how the game is wired, then you're always going to be a victim of the game.
Don't be in the game. Wow.
So, all right. So bottom line. We got enough chips. We're going to be okay. You think we're going to be okay?
Yeah.
We're okay.
Well, we're going to be okay until China decides to do something in response. So this is more of a China issue than it is a shortage issue now. This year.
All right. So we got to look to China and hope that we know what's doing there and what their economy.
One good night's sleep, and he just took it away. That's it. Now I got to be up all night worrying about China, what China's going to do. There's nobody in China. My father used to have a saying, right? Whenever I had a thing, I go, I'm not going to pass that test. I didn't study enough. I'm not going to get the A. And my father would go, there's about 1 billion people in China that don't give a crap about what you just said. But now I got to be worried about those 1 billion people
who don't give a crap about
they don't care about what
said. Before we go, one last thing, Steve. I noticed, and I wanted to listen to it, I didn't have time. that your commencement speech to Philadelphia University was rated by NPR as one of the top commencement speech in the last 300 years.
Really?
Could you just, because I'd like to close on something positive. I'm guessing you didn't depress the kids and say you're screwed. What was it? What was the message there, if you can condense it down, that made it so memorable for so many people and so lauded by so many people? What were you telling young kids? Because maybe that message could go out and resonate today.
Well, there were a couple messages. Most of it was a story of how I ended up where I ended up. And it was about, taking control of your own destiny, and just showing up a lot. The story of my life was sticking out my thumb and seeing where the world would take me, and being present for opportunities. And again, it's also the story of Silicon Valley, is not believing that the world has a set of fixed jobs and roles and whatever, is that you have an opportunity to do almost always what you want to do. I mean, people are constrained about how they grow up and circumstances where they start, but that doesn't mean that's where you need to end up. And I was just telling folks about my journey, was just what their journey could be. Some people started with more circumstance than others, but it doesn't mean you can't end up in a pretty good place. And that's one of the great things about this country, is that it allows us to do that. And that opportunity still abounds, and in fact gets greater almost every year, regardless of race, color, creed nowadays, which obviously were limitations in earlier times in this country.
And also easy.
And so that was the story. And some people found that it resonated with them because it gave them some hope that it didn't matter where you started. It mattered about the journey, and that was the reward.
Steve Blank, thank you. You're really a gentleman for coming on, and I know
Amazing.
that you're so successful. You don't need us. The size
And you
of your
make
roof,
things that I don't understand a little bit clearer, and that is no small.
and by the way, you got a sculpture of an apple to your left. Was that given to you by Steve Jobs, or was that just as a coincidence?
I won't tell you it's actually a sculpture of a fish, but if it looks like an apple,
it looks like an apple.
Wow.
Open. By the way, pivot.
Great story that it came from Steve Jobs
Better
himself,
story.
and he came here and he installed it personally.
That's a fish?
That's a
Steve, are you doing acid? Are you on drugs? Are you on medication? That's not a fish.
Wow.
Somebody told you that's a fish. They're big trouble. It's still not a fish. That room is a big room, Steve. That's bigger than my house. How tall is the ceiling in that room?
He's living on a golf course. Look at the property.
Is that your golf course, Steve? How well did you do?
It's my front lawn.
Okay,
It's the front
good night,
lawn.
ladies.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But you're involved with the giving pledge. You're giving all your money away, right? Can we not announce that right here today, that you're giving all your money away? And part of it does.
My children are taking care of that.
Okay.
Yeah,
all
there
right.
we go.
And
That's fine.
Mine too, the giving
There's
pledge.
nothing wrong with that.
Mine is inadvertent, against my will.
Yeah. Yours is the taking pledge.
Steve,
with it.
thank you for coming
Jason
on.
and Peter, thank you. It's always fun.
A
And,
pleasure.
You're a pleasure, man, and I'm glad to know that there's a glut of chips right now.
Yes, indeed.
I thank
care,
you.
guys.
I thank you.
Take
Take
great
care. Be
care.
safe.
Take care. Talk to me. So, what do we think?
I would like to think that the chip thing is solved, but America doesn't learn.
Well, I'm doing my part because I maintain what I said at the beginning.
Oh yeah,
of
you
this.
don't use
I
chips.
don't use chips.
So wait, okay, let me. I wrote down some things to see if you use chips.
I don't use chips.
Hold on. So
I guarantee I don't use more than.
so you
not
don't have a
even
ring doorbell. You have a ring doorbell.
I do not.
You have a Roomba vacuum.
I do not.
Okay, you don't have to say. Whoa,
I do not.
You don't have to say it obnoxiously. You have a one of the computer toothbrushes. One of
No, no.
Thermostat,
my hand works just
thermostat
fine.
that controls it through an
Not
app?
through an app.
Your lights don't. You don't have lights.
Not through an app.
Clock.
I have to turn them on.
intercom,
Not through an app.
Fitbit.
No, sir.
A coffee maker. Oh, you make Sanka. You make Sanka with a spoon. You're in 1840.
Strangely enough, I do have a chip for that.
Shaver, pacemaker, nothing.
Nothing.
But you have, and you're out of chips, by the way. You're out of regular chips.
I have no corn chips. I have no tortilla chips. I don't use chips.
You really, Jason, you're really.
I assume my car has chips. I assume my
course it
phone or
does.
my
Of
computer
course
has
it
chips.
does.
Other than that, I don't think I have chips. I really don't. I'm part of the solution.
It's like I don't.
I'm cutting down. I'm conserving, so everyone else has a little.
You're so delusional, Laurie. Come in. You have chip. Guggenheim. What did you learn doing this thing? What do we? As a summary, what I learned is, if Steve is to be trusted, it's that.
Wow. You just spent a half an hour with
No,
him.
I
You're
don't.
throwing him under
but
the bus. Why
he's-
wouldn't he be trusted?
Because it's not that he's at the information, but I don't know that who knows who's getting what information. We can't monitor China.
You think he's
He doesn't know
using him?
China doesn't send him spreadsheets. We don't know what they're making.
Okay.
Right? Okay, you know what I'm saying?
What's your point?
I think it's more complex than yes, we're okay or we're not okay. Because I keep hearing we're threatening China, except they own $958 million of our debt. So it's hard. It's like me saying to Laurie, "Go screw yourself," and she goes, "Oh, really? Pay me back the $20,000 I loaned you." And you go, "You know what? Don't screw yourself so quick." It's a balance. You know, there's much more going on there.
So, okay, but let me ask this question. Let's add this wrinkle. So
okay. Are you
another,
pivoting? Is
I
this a
don't know,
pivot?
call it country A. We're country B. Country A puts the screws to country B. Can country A not suffer as a result of that? Aren't we all so interconnected? Our economies, our mutual survival at this point. Is there really? How are you gonna turn to the United States and say we're cutting you off from chips?
Well, you hope,
and survive.
What's sad is it's not because we care about each other. It's that countries in the world will work together because it's commerce. Because it's commerce related.
And we're dependent on each other.
We can't
It's
kill them. They're
mutual
our best.
survival.
They're our best customers. So that's
Yeah.
it. All right, Guggenheim, what do you got?
I think it's Peter, that you're asking Jason if he has a Fitbit.
Yeah, right.
He is really not.
Really? You're asking?
Jason,
Wait a
wait.
minute.
Laurie, how
I
many
think-
times?
I think that was a little bit of a zest.
No, I'll tell
that was a little dig. He's looking at me and going, "That fatso."
Can I just say something?
Fitbit?
Can I say something, Laurie? You come in and testify to this. Oh, she won't. What do you mean you're not? Oh, it's a rebellion from Laurie.
Oh yeah.
Producer Laurie?
Oh yeah. Right.
So
She's
the
had
thing
enough.
is, and you gotta, and don't kiss his ass just because he was on Seinfeld. The first 80
What is
times we
that?
did,
Because
no.
he
The
was on
first
Seinfeld?
80 times we did Zoom meetings. I think Peter's mic is off. I think it's always somebody else's problem, and it turned out to be, you're freezing. It's got to be your problem.
What are you
were
talking about?
The Zooms thing was a problem.
That's
Are
not
you
true.
out of your
Not
mind?
true?
That is not true. It was
Oh, you
you.
suck up. You
It
suck
was
up.
Every time we
You
were doing
suck
this
up.
from our houses,
You
your
suck.
microphone was a
Sorry.
problem.
She's got her lips
David would
planted.
hear my microphone
the
perfectly.
bigger
You
star,
couldn't
bigger
be
star.
heard.
I get it. It's okay. It's okay. Pivot.
Why
pivot.
are you pointing?
You know what?
fingers?
You know what?
Look, you're actually pointing a finger. You're pointing fingers. Point it at yourself, young man. Everyone else is the problem.
You know what you need to do? You need to mellow out and go on an ayahuasca retreat. I'll pay for it. David, anything else? We've got to wrap it up. Laurie's going, wrap it up. It's enough already.
Jimmy Hoffa, anyone?
Yeah, I
Jimmy
remember
Hoffa,
Jimmy
union
Hoffa.
leader, was dead. We don't know who killed
Yeah.
him.
There we go.
Mafia.
Frank Sheeran supposedly killed him.
Yeah.
There you
That's
go.
it. All right, Laurie. All right,
I'll give you one extraneous.
see, he won't rap.
I'll
See, he
give
won't
you
rap.
an
Here he goes.
extraneous,
More.
really, no, really, to think about.
One more. Here we go.
On a YouTube science channel, they have proved using mathematics that the entire internet
Is
weighs 50 grams, or relatively the weight of a strawberry. Really? No, really.